Well, 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 this does look like fun. Rita Skeeter was leaning on Hagrid's garden fence, looking in at the mayhem. She was wearing a thick magenta cloak with a furry purple collar today, and her crocodile skin handbag was over her arm. Hagrid launched himself forward on top of the scroot that was concerning Harry and Ron and flattened it. A blast of fire shot out of its end, withering the pumpkin plants nearby.
Who are you?
That's Hagrid asked Rita Skeeter as he slipped a loop of rope around the scroot's sting and tightened it.
Who are you? Who are you?
Something like that.
Rita Skeeter, Daily Prophet reporter,
Rita replied, beaming at him. Her gold teeth glinted.
Thought Dumbledore said you weren't allowed inside school anymore,
said Hagrid, frowning slightly, as he got off the slightly squashed scroot and started tugging it over to its fellows. Rita acted as though she hadn't heard what Hagrid had just said.
What are these fascinating creatures called?
She asked, beaming still more widely.
Blast-ended scroots.
Really?
Said Rita, apparently full of lively interest.
I've never heard of them before. Where do they come from?
Harry noticed a dull red flush rising up out of Hagrid's wild black beard, and his heart sank. Where had Hagrid got the scroots? Hermione, who seemed to be thinking along these lines, said quickly, "They're very interesting, aren't they? Aren't they, Harry?" "What? Oh, yeah. Interesting," said Harry as she stepped on his foot.
Ah, you're here, Harry,
said Rita Skeeter, as she looked around.
So you like care of magical creatures, do you? One of your favorite lessons?
Yeah, said Harry. Hagrid beamed at him.
Lovely. Really lovely. Been teaching long?
She added to Hagrid. Harry noticed her eyes travel over Dean, who had a nasty cut across his cheek, Lavender, whose robes were badly singed, Seamus, who was nursing several burnt fingers, and then to the cabin windows, where most of the class stood, their noses pressed against the glass, waiting to see if the coast was clear.
This only my second year.
Lovely. I don't suppose you'd like to give an interview, would you? Share some of your experience of magical creatures? The Prophet does a zoological column every Wednesday. As I'm sure you know, we could feature these bang-ended scoots.
Blast-ended squirts. Scroots,
Hagrid said eagerly.
Yeah, why not?
Harry had a very bad feeling about this, but there was no way of communicating it to Hagrid without Rita Skeeter seeing, so he had to stand and watch in silence as Hagrid and Rita Skeeter made arrangements to meet in the Three Broomsticks for a good long interview later that week. Then the bell rang up at the castle, signaling the end of the lesson.
All righty, let's see here. signaling the end of the lesson.
Well, goodbye, Harry,
Rita Skeeter called merrily to him as he set off with Ron and Hermione.
Until Friday then, Hagrid.
She'll twist everything he says, Harry said under his breath. Just as long as he didn't import those Skrewts illegally or anything, said Hermione desperately. They looked at one another. It was exactly the sort of thing Hagrid might do. Hagrid's been in loads of trouble before, and Dumbledore's never sacked him, said Ron. Worst that can happen is Hagrid'll have to get rid of the Skrewts. Sorry, did I say worst? I mean, best. Harry and Hermione laughed, and feeling slightly more cheerful, went off to lunch. Harry thoroughly enjoyed double divination that afternoon. They were still doing star charts and predictions, but now that he and Ron were friends once more, the whole thing seemed very funny again. Professor Trelawney, who had been so pleased with the pair of them when they had been predicting their own horrific deaths, quickly became irritated as they sniggered through her explanation of the various ways in which Pluto could disrupt everyday life.
I would think,
she said, in a mystical whisper that did not conceal her obvious annoyance,
that some of you,
she started to say very meaningfully at Harry,
might be a little less frivolous had they seen what I have seen during my crystal gazing last night, as I sat here, absorbed in my needlework. The urge to consult the orb overpowered me. I arose. I settled myself down before it and gazed into its crystalline depths. And what do you think I saw, gazing back at me?
An ugly old bat in outsized specs? Ron muttered under his breath. Harry fought hard to keep his face straight.
Death, my dears.
Pavarti and Lavender both put their hands over their mouths, looking horrified.
Yes,
said Professor Trelawney, nodding impressively.
It comes ever closer. It circles overhead like a vulture. Ever lower, over the castle.
She stared pointedly at Harry, who yawned very widely and obviously. It'd be a bit more impressive if she hadn't done it about 80 times before, Harry said, as they finally regained the fresh air of the staircase beneath Professor Trelawney's room. But if I'd dropped dead every time she told me I was going to, I'd be a medical miracle. You'd be a sort of extra concentrated ghost, said Ron, chortling. As they passed the Bloody Bear and going in the opposite direction, his eyes wide, staring sinisterly. At least we didn't get homework. I hope Hermione got loads off Professor Vector. I love not working when she is. But Hermione wasn't at dinner, nor was she in the library when they went to look for her afterward. The only person in there was Victor Krum. Ron hovered behind the bookshelves for a while, watching Krum, debating in whispers with Harry whether he should ask for an autograph. But then Ron realized that 6 or 7 girls were lurking in the next row of books, debating exactly the same thing, and he lost his enthusiasm for the idea. "Wonder where she's got to," Ron said as he and Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower. "Dunno. Balderdash." But the fat lady had barely begun to swing forward when the sound of racing feet behind them announced Hermione's arrival, "Harry!" she panted, skidding to a halt beside him. The fat lady stared down at her, eyebrows raised. "Harry, you've got to come. You've got to come. The most amazing things happened. Please!" What could that possibly be about? I dunno what that could possibly be about. I do know, however, that that's been more than 10 minutes of reading. To find out what happens next, you'll have to watch episode 22 of Daddy Reads to His Daughters.